there's something really profoundly important about noticing and not just suppressing your emotions. What are they telling me? What is the message that needs to be heard that I need to pay some attention to? That's a leadership skill.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Exploring Emotional Overdraft with Andy Brown, and today with Julie Smith, who I've met because we have the same publisher and who has written a fabulous book that we will definitely be talking about. So we have someone today who is going to bring the perspective from working in big corporations and that side of emotional overdraft, but also setting up her own business and running her own business. And I'm interested to explore that. She's the founder of Talent Sprout, which is a coaching business for leadership coaching business. And as I already mentioned, she wrote the Amazon bestseller, Coach Yourself Confident. So welcome, Julie.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here.
Me too. So could I just ask you to do a quick intro to yourself? Mine was flimsy. If you could just tell people what would be useful to know, because they're going to listen to you and go, this woman knows her stuff. So what should they know about you?
Okay, so I avoided the response there, which was, let's hope people think that she knows her stuff, because it could take us into a whole rabbit hole about confidence. But anyway, so background-wise, a career of sort of two parts. So first half in corporate. So I started my working life working for Mars, spent 4 years there, and then went to work for PepsiCo for 11 years. So very familiar with the sort of dynamics of big corporates and taking on kind of increasingly bigger roles in fast-paced, demanding corporates. I did love it, by the way. It sounds as though I'm negative there, but it's just a description of the context. And then 14 years ago, I decided to leave Pepsi and set up Talent Sprout, which, as you rightly say, is leadership coaching, kind of one-to-one leadership teams. And also I put together leadership programs typically around culture changes that an organization wants to make. And that's what's been keeping me busy with a whole variety of clients for the last 14 years.
And that's why I wanted to talk to you. That understanding of what the challenges are that leaders deal with, that understanding of how that surfaces and how they deal with it. Because the point about exploring emotional overdraft is for people to see how either other people deal with it themselves or work with leaders to deal with their emotional overdrafts, which is where you come in. And it's so important because even though I've written a book, I was going to say the book, but a book about it, it still manifests in so many different ways for people. And just for people new to this who may be listening for the first time or haven't read Exploring Emotional Overdraft, an emotional overdraft is when you subsidize the success of your business at the cost of your own mental or physical well-being. So you're subsidizing your business's success at your own cost. And the currency we talk about for an emotional overdraft is resilience. So as you subsidize your business at your own cost, you may see the P&L doing fine, but there's that invisible line in your P&L, which is the subsidy line coming from you. And in the end, that becomes like any overdraft. It's very expensive borrowing and it's unsustainable. So that's just the context when we're talking about emotional overdraft. That's what we're talking about. And it manifests itself in lots of different ways. And there are sort of behaviors that create emotional overdraft and that stress, which can lead to burnout and overwhelm and worse. So one of the things that Julie's done is she's come looking down to my right here because she's completed the emotional overdraft self-assessment, which you can do online, which, interestingly, you pointed out that you may be less relevant to you because you don't run a team. And it definitely is. The self-assessment is focused around people that run a business and then start adding people to their team. But why did you think the self-assessment was still useful, given that you have a one-person, well, you're a solopreneur is the new phrase, isn't it? So,
great phrase, like that. Well, I think there were some pieces that I thought, okay, that's less relevant because it's about delegation, let's say, for the sake of argument. But there is so much in there that just shines a light on habits that don't serve me well. And I think I think for me, it didn't sort of show up something, and you wouldn't expect it to show up something, brand new that I didn't know about myself, but it was a new lens through which to look at, okay, yeah, there's that thing that I do, that overcommitting thing that has a cost. And I think that's part of what's really, really useful about the idea of emotional overdraft is you think then in terms of, so what is the cost? And yeah, we've got this sort of mental shortcut that an overdraft is an expensive thing. So I guess it just made me think about the expensive cost of some of my habits.
Fantastic. I think habits is what it is about. And that's why, when we talk about 10 simple changes, they are simple, not easy, because changing habits are not easy. But I think you've nailed why it's so useful, because even if you just understand there is a label, this thing that you feel has a name, and in the moment you stop and recognize, oh, maybe I'm adding to my emotional overdraft with that. Just recognizing that perhaps will help, because just taking a pause or taking a beat can make a difference.
Definitely. I think that, the word that comes to my mind is choice. And I think it can help us make more informed choices. So it's, anything that raises the awareness of some of our default habits, I think is helpful, because we can be much more aware of those things and make a choice that is better informed. So if I'm just more aware as I, get asked, could you take on this piece of work? If I'm more aware of, red flashing lights, it perhaps makes it easier to say no. I'm not very good at saying no, but it perhaps makes it easier.
And that's why, I really want to talk about your book, but since we've gone here, I think you score quite highly, or you do score quite highly on empathy. And lots of people say, why is empathy a bad thing, Andy? Empathy isn't. None of the behaviours that we score in emotional overdraft are bad things, unless you apply them in the wrong way. And the empathy one is I can put myself in their shoes, I can understand how they feel, I want to be seen to be supportive, so I just say yes.
Absolutely.
And then it comes onto you, doesn't it? So do you see that in your clients? Is it it's a fairly typical behaviour, I would think?
Yes, definitely. See it. I was talking to a new client yesterday who, interesting, there's a sort of two lessons in here. One is that I definitely felt my rescuer playing out. So the individual I have worked with in the past, they are finding things difficult for a lot of reasons at the moment. I wanted some support. I think really I don't have space to take on a client, but I couldn't resist. So I had the sense that, they need support. They're only asking me. I want to help them. So my want to help sort of outweighed the knowledge in my head about my diary capacity. But the other sort of way it played out was for that individual, some of what's happening is they can see that they are at risk of ending up with no fuel in the tank. They're at risk of burning out through a particularly difficult period, because they have quite sort of hardwired into them putting other people's needs before their own, which I think is the sort of where empathy tips into. Empathy is a wonderful thing. We want people to develop empathy, but I think when it tips into putting other people's needs before your own, or not even seeing your own needs, then it's no longer a strength, and it's actually quite undermining.
And you combine that. This self-assessment is not particularly scientific. When we were developing the book, we called it the Cosmo quiz. It's kind of 50 reasons why your boyfriend might leave you type questions in a way, yeah. but it's pretty consistent and seems pretty accurate in a way. But I just noticed your other two big drivers are duty and urgency. So the feeling that it is your duty to do this, and the kind of urgency, get things done, fix stuff, added to that empathy, I imagine makes it even harder for you to say no to things, because you're that sort of person.
Absolutely. And I think I can get hooked by the client's urgency. So whether that's a sort of client organization or an individual, an individual leader, I think I can get really hooked by their urgency, even though there's a sort of rational part of my brain that knows that often that urgency isn't real. It's sort of fake, or it feels real in the organization, but there isn't some law that says this strategy has to be launched by August, or whatever it might be. But I can definitely get hooked by that. And similarly, I see in coaching clients how often they're almost held hostage by a sense of urgency and pace in the organization, and feel like they have no choice but to kind of desperately try and keep up, regardless of the cost that it is attached to it for themselves.
Yeah, I often hear myself saying that stress is contagious. And I think it really can be. I think that, and that can draw coaches, it can draw line managers, it can draw family, other people can get drawn into it. But I wonder if urgency is magnetic.
Yes.
So,
I think it is. Yeah.
If someone else's urgency, and you kind of get drawn to it like a north and south magnet, you're just kind of inexorably drawn towards their urgency. Because, like you said, it's so interesting. You say that these deadlines, something has to be launched by the end of August. Someone somewhere decided that one day, and it was probably arbitrary.
Absolutely.
And if it wasn't arbitrary, it still doesn't matter.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's still not worth half killing yourself to deliver against the deadline, kind of, arbitrary or not.
Or completely killing yourself, because actually it just made me think of the satellite launch. There was a rocket launch this week, I heard. I mean, one of the many, these things now, we just take them for granted. But there was a rocket launch that was delayed because there was something they weren't 100% convinced about technically with the rocket. And the guys that were flying it were sitting in it. I think the countdown might even have started. So everyone knew what day this thing was supposed to launch, but they took the view in the last 10 seconds, to pull the plug out and stop it. And if you can do that with something as phenomenally expensive and complex as launching a rocket, then we can do that with a product launch, or we can do it with a hire, or there's a sort of this is where kindness maybe comes back in, being kind to yourself, being considerate, where these deadlines aren't real until you make them real. This all goes on in our head, doesn't it? This is our thinking.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and it seems to me there's something fundamentally different about the two people sitting in a rocket who could literally, it is a case of life and death. I think that's more obvious somehow than the piles of pressure that can be in a big organization where there is a human impact, and there's probably a lower level human impact on a lot of people, but it's somehow not as visible. Leaders maybe choose not to see it. It's like, I can't, I'm going to pretend that's not there because there's this sort of bigger need to launch on time for probably, there's probably a multitude of good reasons. That's why it's hard actually to sort of break that cycle.
And I do remember SWOT analysis when I was at university, and every strength was a weakness and every opportunity was a threat. And as you were talking there, I was thinking the opposite of this, though, is equally problematical, which is procrastination and no accountability and not holding. From an emotional overdrive point of view, we know this is happening. We know things aren't getting done, but so that adds pressure and builds pressure on us. And that can then mean that we're less capable of getting things done because we're under that pressure. What do you say to your leaders in those circumstances? So the opposite of that, what if someone isn't getting things done, what's the sort of thing you might say to them?
I think the sort of first answer to that is curiosity. So it's sort of digging into what is going on for them. What is the reason why they are procrastinating? Because there's more than one flavour, if you like, of procrastination. So what is it that's getting in the way? Actually, are they not clear on what needs to be done? I think sometimes in organisations, there's almost this sort of game of pretense that goes on, that the brief that you get from someone more senior isn't clear, but you feel somehow obliged to take it forward anyway, and then you're a bit stuck because I don't really know what to do, but I've sort of come to this conclusion that I can't, that somehow it reflects badly on me if I say that's not clear, the brief is not crystal clear, I don't know what to do, because I think it's an assumption that I should know. So that can go on. I think there can be self-doubt that fuels procrastination, so they almost or fear of failure. I can't fail if I don't do it. If I don't actually start, it sort of puts off the risk of failure. So I think it's really about trying to get underneath the surface of what what is getting in the way? What are you perhaps telling yourself that's leading you to put it off? Because we all know that procrastination stores up trouble for ourselves later on. It isn't usually a rational decision. Well, it's not, is it? It's just not a rational decision. It's not I'm going to put this in the schedule for later. It's I should be doing this, but I'm not, which in itself takes emotional energy.
That's the cost, isn't it? That's the cost. If nothing else happens, whatever the consequence of the delay, simply not doing it today and leaving it for another day and seeing it on the to-do list. I do want to talk to you about to-do lists. Is there's a cost. There's a certain amount of damage that's doing to you or cost. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's obvious that, I mean, spoiler alert, almost everyone I spoke to has an emotional overdraft in my research. Almost everyone has an emotional overdraft most of the time or a lot of the time. Very, very few people dip in and then dip out and pay it back. It's very few people can do that. So this concept that we're talking about, if people are nodding along going, well, this is bloody obvious, yes, that's because it's so universal. It is a challenge. But you've written the book called Coach Yourself Confident. How do you think that, I don't want to answer the question, I'd love to, but how do you think that fits with people who are listening to this going, I've done my self-assessment, I can see where my emotional overdraft is occurring. Maybe I run my own business and I've got, 20 staff, 50 staff, 3 staff, and I feel like I know this is a problem, but I just can't do anything about it. Where would Coach Yourself Confident fit as a tool to help?
Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is sort of at top level. I think our books are in similar territory in that they are in sort of self-management. So, how can we better know ourselves? How can we deepen our awareness and then make choices on the basis of that awareness? So I think there's a sort of fundamental crossover in a good way between the territories that we've written about. I guess there are some other potentials. So one of the things I do that contributes to my emotional overdraft is exceptionally high standards. And I know that some of what sits behind the exceptionally high standards is actually self-doubt. Certainly historically, I think I've sort of developed this habit, and I still have probably standards that are too high. I still have things that I over prepare for, because I don't quite trust myself to just talk in the moment or to just figure out a way forward in the moment. And that's a confidence thing, or a self-doubt thing. And I imagine, some of the other elements maybe of emotional overdraft, empathy can show up as people pleasing, which again, underneath can have a degree of self-doubt. Like, I'm not enough in myself. I'm not good enough in myself. People might not kind of like me or value me for just who I am. I need to step forward and make things easy for people or please people. So I think there's probably quite a few ways where, as you're delving into, so what's going on there, what sits behind that thing that I do that contributes to my emotional overdraft, sometimes there might be a piece of self-doubt, an aspect, a thread of self-doubt there. What would be your answer though, Andy? I noticed you said, I'd love to answer it. I wonder what your take on it is.
I'll answer that in a second. I just wanted to stick with that. And I'm going to share something you told me just before we sort of went live, if that's okay. And we can edit it out if you don't want me to.
No,
but
you're all good.
But first thing you said when we've spoken quite a few times now, was that you said, I feel underprepared. And I was going to reread my self-assessment, and I was going to, and life got in the way. And what I heard was that's just so normal. It's so normal but you're high in expectations of yourself. You're maybe unreasonable expectations of yourself for a 9 o'clock call. Life happened. That's that's exactly what you're talking about, isn't it? That's an everyday occurrence of what many of us feel much of the time, probably. We're rushing from one thing to another. We don't feel fully prepared. And yet when you said that to me, what I thought was, I persuaded the author of a best-selling book to come onto my podcast. It's full of information that's going to be useful. And I think that's, I feel like a slight fraud with emotional overdraft, because I've identified and named the concept, and I provided 10 drivers and some ideas how you can change. But each one of those chapters, you could become a student of that particular driver. And there are dozens of books around habit, and there are dozens of books around confidence, and dozens of books around self-doubt and so on. So I just think it's so interesting that you came on, and before we started speaking, you said, I feel a bit underprepared. And I'm thinking, this woman's an expert. She's going to smash it. And you are. So it's just what we tell ourselves and the realities can be so different. Answering your question, I really liked the idea of humble confidence, because that seemed to, I picture the self-assessment as it is a spider chart, so I picture it as this kind of spider chart. And humble confidence seems to me to span two sides of that across and up and down. It seems to, so I say humble confidence. I'd love you to tell us more about that. And the other one was something we just touched on there, but you gave a name to, which is the self-doubt tax. Could you tell us more about those two things? I think they are really useful and dial straight into emotional overdraft.
So self-doubt tax is the name that I give. And again, it's similar to you. I think sometimes it's helpful to just name a thing. It's not like we've come up with the thing, but just putting a name to it can help, putting a term to it. So it's the cost of kind of oversized self-doubt. So I guess my premise is that self-doubt is human, it's normal, it's actually necessary, it has some kind of useful functions attached. But when it becomes oversized, so we listen too much to our inner critic and we doubt ourselves in ways that aren't warranted, then there's a cost attached to that. And I talk about the self-doubt tax being levied in two ways. So one is if we stay small and stay safe, then we pay the self-doubt tax in the form of missed opportunities and unfulfilled potential, which could be, I missed the opportunity to put my point of view forward in that meeting, or it could be I missed the opportunity to put myself forward for a promotion. It can be kind of big and small. And the other way that the self-doubt tax can be levied is, and this was probably my modus operandi in corporate life, was if we push ourselves to deliver impressive results despite a sort of nagging self-doubt, often what happens is we do that via overwork, which can result in exhaustion. So that is where there's sort of, my habit of over-preparation, which I was uncomfortable that I hadn't managed to over-prepare for this session. Habit of over-preparation, habit of holding ourselves to standards that are beyond what is necessary and good enough. Then we pay this tax. We're doing that as a compensation for a lack of confidence, and the cost then is extended hours, overwork, exhaustion. Ultimately, it's not sustainable forever.
And that's why I think it's smack into emotional overdraft. That's brilliant. I can, as you were talking, I could picture a whole community of people nodding, just going, oh yes. That's it.
Yeah.
And particularly that it occurs in two places, at two ends of that spectrum. Could you just clarify again the first half of that? I think the second half is quite straightforward, but the first half is a little more subtle.
Yeah. So I guess it's holding ourselves back somehow. So it's allowing doubt to. Let's imagine you're in a meeting and you've got a point of view, you've got something to add to the conversation, but you stay quiet because you don't know how it will land. You worry about how other people might judge what you're saying, and by extension, you. Or perhaps you worry that nobody wants to hear your point of view anyway. Nobody cares. You're sort of not important enough. And that leads you to stay quiet. It's that staying small, staying safe, staying quiet that means you miss out. You don't get to, worst case is you never get to find out what your potential is, because you sort of don't get anywhere near the edge of what you're capable of. You just stay small, stay safe. And I think people can feel really frustrated by that. I have coaches who are, frustrated, and they know that they do that, and then they add a layer of beating themselves up about, why didn't I put myself forward? Why didn't I volunteer for that project? Why didn't I do this? Which is another sort of, berating themselves on top. It's another layer of, difficulty, I guess.
And for a leadership point of view, if you were running a smaller business, could that be the other way around as well? Which is where you're not, maybe it means you don't hold people to account, or you're not sharing what you're thinking for the same reasons, with the same fear of.
Yeah, I think there can definitely be. I mean, I guess it brings me to the way it can play out in a different way. That the being safe in your strategies and plans. So kind of not being brave and saying, I think we can do this, or I think we can stretch the team to do that. And actually just, again, back to sort of playing small, but in a slightly different way in terms of what are we setting out to do, how stretching are the targets we're setting ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. That's another way in which there are missed opportunities, because again, you're not quite pushing yourself or your team or your business as far as it could go. And that's not, I suppose the point is, that's not because that was a strategic choice. That wasn't a clean choice. It was more from a habit of just staying on the safe side.
Fantastic. Thank you for clarifying that. I think that's so helpful. And then the other thing that I'd mentioned was humble confidence.
Yes. So humble confidence, if you like, is a sort of particular type of confidence that I advocate and want to support leaders to, or anyone to develop. And I guess fundamentally it's the balance, it's the matching up of your capability with your confidence. So if I think about people who pay the self-doubt tax, usually what's happened is their confidence lags behind their capability. So they don't really see how good they are. Other people will be saying to them, you should be confident because you're brilliant, and they just can't. Unfortunately, that doesn't help. That doesn't.
Not very. I was going to say it's not very helpful. Just say you should be confident. It's just like saying, well, just run faster. Well, yeah, of course. If I could, I would. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I'd not thought about it before. Maybe I'll just be more confident. So rather than there being either that sort of deficit that the confidence is lagging behind the capability, or the opposite, where confidence outstrips capability, there's this sort of balance. I talk about sort of just enough, just the right amount of confidence, because it's a realistic sense of what I bring. I can own my strengths. I know what I'm good at, and I also know what I can still develop on, and I'm okay with that. I don't beat myself up about that. I accept that every single human being has ways in which they can develop. We are never the finished article. So I talk about the sort of mantra of humble confidence, which is I am good enough and I can be better, which I think is a really, if we can adopt that, it feels quite freeing, because I'm okay with, I'm really owning the ways in which I'm good enough. I'm not focusing on kind of gaps. I am focusing on opportunities. There is an opportunity. There is always ways to be better, and I can sort of seek those out. I can go forwards towards them, but not with the sort of sense of, oh God, I should be good at that anyway, or somehow trying to fill a deficit. There isn't the deficit. There isn't any lack. And
there's a huge point there, I think, for particularly entrepreneurs and founders, where there's that sense of, I don't want to say imposter syndrome, because I don't think that's necessarily a helpful expression, but the idea of, I'm making this up as I go along. I started off being very good at this thing, and then people bought a lot of that. I spoke to someone recently on the podcast, and he said basically I was a web developer. I was really good, and so more people came to me, so I needed help. So I had staff, and I was making it all up. I felt like I was just making it up. So that fits in there as well, doesn't it? I think you might find yourself dealing with that a lot, and then your behaviours might compensate for that in particular ways. How might that manifest itself, do you think?
I mean, I think that's so interesting, isn't it? It's almost the framing for that individual, like I'm making it up as I go along, feels like, even that the wording feels like, and I shouldn't be, I should know what I'm doing, I'm a fraud. Whereas actually the sort of reframing is more about, I'm learning. Oh my goodness, I'm learning at such an enormous rate. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I kind of feel moments of panic, but of course I'm learning because I've never done this before. I can't possibly know these things. I can't possibly have the experience before I have it. It's just, if this is a normal process, and it was the same for whichever name of, hugely successful entrepreneur you want to add into the sentence. They had a very similar process. They learnt as they went. Their learning curve was, dramatically steep. But I think it's very interesting. Often it's about catching ourselves, back to the stories we tell ourselves, catching ourselves. How are we, even with the language that we use? What sort of slant are we putting on that? Is it somehow I should be better at this, or is it acknowledgement of the current reality?
Fabulous. I think reframing is such a useful, if you can spot the moment to apply it, is such a useful exercise. Is there a tip for that? How can you spot when a reframe might be helpful?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I guess one, I'm sure there's multiple signals, but one is when you have a sort of an emotional reaction in terms of just not feeling great about it. So maybe it's the thing that keeps going around in your head, or perhaps you notice yourself using the same phrase multiple times. There's something about, and there's an edge to it. There is I guess it's sort of in the territory of noticing your own responses, of really tuning into, when does it actually not feel great? I've got like this bit of an icky feeling in my stomach. I notice when I say, oh my goodness, I have no idea what I'm doing. That's perhaps a signal that maybe I'm telling myself something that isn't true. And I'm a big advocate of, I don't want people to, I'm not into sort of mantras of, I could do anything, I'm a tiger, and we don't need to go to the opposite extreme. We just need to catch ourselves when we're telling ourselves something that is not objectively true. And I think often a reframe is something that is, how do I take something that has a bit of a negative slant and reframe it in a way that is more objectively true?
I think it was your book, and I apologise if I'm not true, but take the credit. Did you talk about challenging your inner critic?
Yes.
Brilliant. So that's related then, isn't it? Is this related to your inner critic, or is this what some people call the gremlin, taming your gremlin? Great book. Is that what's going on here? Is it your self-doubt?
Yes, I think it's probably a simplification, but you can think about the inner critic as just the voice of your self-doubt, the way that you hear it. And not all of us hear. I hear it. I feel like it has a voice, and a lot of people have that experience. And I'm a big advocate of, see if you can externalize that inner critic voice, and put some distance between what it's telling you and you. Because when it's just operating in the shadows, when it's just whispering to us, or even feels like shouting at us in our mind, it's all too easy for us to assume that what it's saying is true. Whereas often it's lying to us. Our inner critic is lying. Often it's exaggerating. It's a voice of fear. It comes from a place of fear. So if we can separate ourselves from what it's saying, so one of the things I suggest is give your inner critic a name. Mine's called Nigel, and if I can catch it and go, okay, that's Nigel again. Nigel is trying to keep me safe, but actually it's not helpful. The way that he's trying to keep me safe by saying, don't say anything, you're going to sound like an idiot. That's not actually helpful. I choose to sort of say, okay, thanks, I hear you, but I'm going to speak up anyway. But that fact of naming your inner critic plays to this idea of distance. So it's not just a voice in your head that feels very difficult to disbelieve. It is an entity that's a little bit separate from you.
And I realised as I was thinking, this sounds a bit odd, but my coach, and I have a coach, we called mine Little Andy, which I know is, has other connotations, but it was not because it was, young Andy or small voice, but because it was belittling. was little in the sense of the self-doubt, the questioning, the you can't do that, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't, why the hell have you got a podcast, who's going to listen to you? And by the way, we've just had, I mean, this is tiny compared to some of them, but we just had our first 500 listen podcast. So, you know, it grows, this thing grows, and that's Stephen Bartlett, we're coming for you. And but that belittling and smallening and that is how I hear it. That the amazing Rena Loisy, who I quote a lot on this, she says that your feelings are a measure of the quality of I always touch my heart when I say this. Your feelings are a measure of the quality of your thinking. And so you said it just a little bit earlier, that if you're feeling it somehow, if you're feeling frustrated or angry or flustered or irritated or angry, or that's a really good indicator that your thinking is not serving you very well. So that's how I spot them, but not always. It doesn't stop me waving my fist at people in the car and all the things that I do. But you know, but if you think of your feelings as a bellwether, then it's a great way of helping spot your inner critic, I think. And then you can hear it if you dissociate from it and go, well, there it is chatting away. Well, you know, you're very unhelpful and I know what you are now, and you can maybe do something differently. That's the point, isn't it? Is to do something different.
Yes, absolutely. I love your point about feelings as a bellwether. It's sort of that idea of emotions are designed to evoke motion. You know, they're designed to send you a message. So there is something about tuning into them and accepting them, and not, I think this goes to some of the, particularly in kind of corporate worlds where the pace is just so high and you can feel like there isn't enough room to be human. You're just kind of doing and doing and doing and doing. There's something really profoundly important about noticing and not just suppressing your emotions. What are they telling me? What is the message that needs to be heard that I need to pay some attention to?
And that's how we see
a leadership skill.
Exactly that. Exactly. This is why so much conversation in leadership is now about, it is too blunt to say it's about empathy. It's too blunt to say it's about share your feelings. And people can, oh God, share your feelings. It isn't that. It's being connected to your emotions, which then gives you it's a dashboard of intelligence. It's a piece of management information almost that goes, why is that happening? And going back to the very first thing we spoke about, which was these artificial deadlines. You're feeling under pressure, you're feeling stressed, you're feeling, because of this deadline, that's purely your thinking creating that. And if you stop for a moment and challenge it, you might go, well, what is the cost of meeting that deadline, and what's the cost of changing that deadline? Might give you the opportunity to re-engineer something better. But if we're just pushed along, but compelled.
Yes. I think it also connects back to your point about stress being contagious and urgency being magnetic, that I think there's a skill in identifying what's mine and what am I picking up from the context and the environment. And I think that happens a lot in corporates, where if I think back to my own experience, where you do pick up sort of a sense of urgency and delivery, and some of the feelings that actually, and stress, that are unhelpful, and they feel like yours, but maybe they're not, or maybe maybe it's some of yours, but then it's being amplified by a whole sort of shared experience and something in the ether about urgency and stress and standards, all of these things.
And the absolute truth of that is a reaction I can remember probably multiple times. One specific, I can remember getting very frustrated with a member of my team who wasn't getting stressed as we approached a deadline. And I was cross because they weren't as stressed as everyone else, because I interpreted that as lack of commitment, didn't understand really what was going on, wasn't interpreting. And my God, this is serious. And they went on to be a fantastic, he now runs an agency network and is, high achieving and fabulous. But what I look back and realized was this was someone who could just handle the moment, who was refusing. He'd been inoculated against the stress. So he didn't need to take on the stress. What he needed to do was to be the calm voice, to be rational. He'd obviously listened to his emotions and gone, well, then this is how I need to respond. Fabulous, but not easy to do.
No,
it's rare.
Yes, countercultural and rare and open to misinterpretation. That do they not care? Which is, almost like a cardinal sin in a fast-moving, demanding organisation. They don't get it. So quite hard to hold on to that skill.
I quite often have clients who go, they don't seem to care. Well, firstly, if you set the business up and run it for 10 years, you are likely to care more than they do. So your calibration might need to be reset. But also, they do care. But they care in a different way and they manifest it in a different way. And they aren't entrepreneurs who've set up a company. They are someone who works for somebody. So they're wired differently anyway. So they can be more dispassionate, perhaps. They can be more organised and rational about it and less emotional.
Yes. And what's useful in that? How do you hook into what's useful in that for you? They might be providing a bit of balance, actually, that you're currently thinking, it's not enough. They're not caring enough, but maybe they're bringing something incredibly useful to help you keep your emotional overdraft in check, to help you to, kind of view things a bit more dispassionately sometimes.
But as you say, it could be countercultural because everyone else is agreeing with the boss and going, yeah, he doesn't seem to give a damn. And they don't seem to be one of us. They're not in the gang. They're not in the trenches. They go home on time. We hear that a lot. But yeah, but that's because they're protecting themselves. When they come back stronger. They come back ready to contribute. They're not. Yeah, there's a lot to explore in that. I want to talk to you about to-do lists because I know this is something you are have a point of view on. Please tell me about to-do lists.
So, to-do lists. I think they're a bit of the tyranny of the to-do list. With
the expression that your inbox is just somebody else's to-do list. I thought that was lovely. I heard that the other day and thought, yeah, that's right.
I think definitely much less so now that I work for myself, but definitely in my corporate days. I mean, that's one of the things I think one of the reasons I chose to leave was not just because of my inbox, but that sort of idea of just being bombarded by to-dos from other people and make it very difficult to sort of keep your arms around what's a sensible workload, what's my own capacity. But yeah, so the tyranny of the to-do list. I can't live without a to-do list. Like I have a to-do list at a weekend for, it says washing, buy food, all of it. That's kind of how I live my life. And I'm spectacularly bad at writing a realistic to-do list. I talk in the book about this idea of faulty calibration, which shows up in different ways. Like it's when we see our strengths much smaller than they actually are. But it's also when we think we can get more done than is realistic. And then when we don't, because surprisingly enough, if I write 10 meaty things on my to-do list on a day when I've also got coaching calls, I can't get them done, but I feel rubbish about it. And I've set that up for myself because I've set an expectation that is unrealistic by writing all of these things down and then, created a feeling of dissatisfaction and perhaps a sense of I should have been able to do that. Like if I was better at my job or if I was more efficient or whatever, I should have been able to do that. So I think there's a skill that I'm still working on to write useful and realistic to-do lists. The current antidote that I'm playing with, and it was my one simple thing, Andy, so I'll have to think of another one when we get to that, but simple thing, it's all right, would be a done list, which I think various people have talked about, but I saw it in Oliver Burkeman's brilliant book 4,000 Weeks, and it's the idea of the end of the day writing a done list. So some of that will be the things that you've ticked off your to-do list, but in addition to that, there will be the things that came up that you hadn't anticipated and you got done. And I take quite a broad view then of, what I got done. So if it includes, spending time supporting my son on his flashcards for biology GCSE, then I'll write that down because that was part of how I used my time that day. And it's really important, actually. So there's often my done list is far longer, has far more items on it than the ticked bits of my to-do list, if that makes sense. And it makes it easier for me to see more clearly how kind of productive, how effective has my day been. And it makes it easier to put work down at the end of the day and say, okay, I've done enough. Whereas when I don't do that, I think my brain is a bit more focused on the things that were on that unrealistic to-do list that didn't get ticked. And then I sort of have a niggling sense of I should carry on, or maybe I should come back to my laptop after dinner, or maybe, I should get this done. Whereas the done list makes it easier for me to just shut down and say, right, that's it, end of the day.
Fantastic. It is a good book. Yeah, it's a good book. I don't call my to-do list a to-do list. I haven't done for years. I call it my don't forget list. And it changes my relationship to the to-do list. A to-do list says these are things you have to do. It's compulsive. It's saying you must do these things. In reality, if I look at it, and I do have one, and I have it in my book, and it's always live, it's actually just things I mustn't forget to do. So it's my don't forget list, or DNF. And then each morning, and I have them here, and normally I don't have these here when I'm doing my podcast, so I don't distract myself, but I've got little scraps of paper, and I take things off my to-do list, or my don't forget list, and say, today, these are the things I will achieve. And then when I've done them, I scrunch them up and I throw them in the bin. And then my bin, my equivalent of the done list is these things. And they're scrap paper, so I'm not, and you get the sense of, it's a real physicality to it. And they're in the bin, along with the Kit Kat wrapper, I noticed, which I shouldn't be eating. Bit of self-accountability there. That's my way of doing the same thing, but it might well have come from Oliver's book. I'm not sure, but not the calling it "Don't Forget" list, but the idea of visualizing what you've achieved, because we're hardwired to run past that, aren't we? We're hardwired to look at whatever success we have. I was in this weekend. I got an article published in Management Today. Yes. I'm delighted, very excited.
Yeah.
But I'm already straight past that and running on and being disappointed that I'm not in, whatever else it is. So we're hardwired, aren't we, not to look at that as success once we've done it. So to-do lists are torturous things, and useful, but we need to own them. So I've pinched your one simple change. So the concept of the book is that emotional overdraft does not require you to particularly learn new things. It requires you to understand to notice and then do something about your behavior. And you're right, it's primarily about habit. And your one simple change there was to do with the to-do list. Is there anything else?
I've got another one to do with the to-do list.
I thought you might have some more. Is there anything you can elaborate on that? So let's because by the way, we say one simple change, not one easy change. Changing habits, changing behavior is the hardest and last thing that tends to happen. And that's why all the habit books are so successful, because it's really difficult to change your habits. But so what's that one simple change? You got that extra thing you can give us to take away and use.
So it's in the same territory of to-do lists, and it's one of the things that I learned from writing the book. So I don't know whether you had this experience, Andy, but every time I spoke to Alison, our publisher, or joined a sort of author call, she's brilliant, I felt like I came away with at least three more things that I ought to be doing, and it could get really overwhelming really fast. So I had a to-do list, but I had a do later list, and maybe I could have called it a possibilities list. And there were some things that I just very consciously put there, and then that changed my relationship to them, and it made it feel less overwhelming. So it was similar to sort of the do not forget rather than to do. It just gave me permission to not even think about when I might do them. And I've still got some things on there from that process, and so it's probably now a probably never list, but I'm okay with that. So there was something useful for me in the sort of labeling of and almost a process of triage, as because you constantly see opportunities and things that I'm always kind of spotting, oh, I could do that. And yes, you could if time was unlimited, but it's not. So the sort of posting it somewhere in thought for the future or possibilities, or if I ever get spare time, that kind of a list.
Fantastic.
Was, useful for me.
And it takes away its power of immediacy, doesn't it? It distances you from it. It's a bit like the Spartan babies. I don't know if it's true or not, but I remember learning about the Spartans at school, and they used to leave their babies on a rock for 30 days or something. It can't be true.
Sounds cool.
And the strong ones that survived then became Spartans, and the ones that didn't, tough. So there must have been something they did. And that kind of feels like that for your ideas. Put it out there on the rock and leave it to, if the crows get it, then a bit visual. But, it's not, or if it just stays there because it doesn't have any merit, it's not going to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably a connected point, which is about trying to disconnect from shoulds. So there was a period of time where I felt like I should start a podcast, and I kept coming back to a decision not to. But there's something in there about kind of disconnecting from should to, okay, I could do that, but what's the choice that I want to make? So just kind of swapping the should, if I feel sense of obligation, take should out of the sentence, swap it for could, and then figure out, what do I want to do, actually?
Brilliant, which is more or less where we started the conversation, I think. Fantastic. I knew it would be great talking to you. It would have been better if you prepared properly, obviously. We wouldn't have had this car crash of a conversation. Wouldn't have, just we got nothing out of it, had nothing to say, did we? It was brilliant. Thank you. And if people want to get in touch with you, what do you want them? It sounds like you're busy, but what do you want people to do? How can they get hold of you?
So 2 things I'd say. So my website is talentsprout.co.uk. And then the way to connect with me ideally would be LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. And if you there's about 3 million Julie Smiths, but if you search for Julie Smith Talent Sprout, then you'll find me, and I'd love to connect with people there.
And maybe buy the book.
Oh, and obviously very welcome to buy.
Got that one in there for our publisher who says, why didn't you mention the book? So,
yes, absolutely.
Saved you there, Julie. Thank you so much. Thanks for sparing the time. It was
Pleasure.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Andy.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I thought it was fascinating. And they always are, these conversations, because it's an important subject, and people come on and are so generous with their time and their sharing their expertise and their experience. So it was fabulous. As ever, I encourage you to listen to it without making notes, and then go and listen to it again and pick out the meat off the bone if you want to work that way. But there's a few things that struck me as we were talking with Julie there, and I just wanted to pick up on them. And she highlighted that emotional overdraft those behaviors tend to come out of habits. And I say this often, but she's right. And she's on the lookout. I like that she's on the lookout for habits that don't serve her well. It's a lovely idea. And we explored quite a bit around how we spot those behaviors. So that was a lovely idea in there. We obviously talked a lot about empathy, and that's important, to be empathetic, but also not to let that drive some unhelpful behaviors as well. Self-doubt tax, what a great idea. And she said at one point, it's when it's not a strategic choice. And I love this idea of you're making decisions and making choices and behaving in particular ways where they aren't strategic. They're just out of habit. They're just out of reflex. So there's something to be explored in there. And I'm not going to do it now because that's probably another podcast, but it's something to think about your decision making, and are these decisions serving you? And particularly in the relation to the self-doubt tax, which occurs, in two different places, which was fascinating, I thought. I loved the summary of the humble confidence, the idea of I'm good enough and I can be better. I thought, what a, it goes to learning, it goes to curiosity, it goes to self-kindness. But the idea of I am good enough and you are, but I can do better, or I can be better. Yes, you can. And that's about how you choose to behave, what you choose to do, how you choose to learn, and so on. So I thought that was tattoo worthy. I think that was, I am good enough and I can be better. And then, well, how? And you can do some things about that. Reframing was a good thought. I talk about reframing a lot, and clearly it's a coaching technique. But I liked the idea of listening out for the language we use, listening out for unhelpful language, in particularly in your inner critic or in your gremlin, listening out for that unhelpful language, particularly language we use about ourselves. And I think she said something about outing your inner critic. And that's great. Let's listen out for it. Visualize it, and if you treat it as somebody else rather than just some inner reality, you treat it as a thing, then you can have a relationship with it, and you can start to work on that relationship. And I think that was fabulous. There were two more things that jumped out at me. One was faulty calibration. And I'd never thought of this before. The idea that we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves, which is not an original thought, but we then sort of judge ourselves against that. And we're calibrating against something that is not real. It's how we perceive other people to have achieved, or what we perceive other people to have done. So the idea of having unrealistic expectations that then set the calibration that we then measure ourselves against is lovely, and definitely something I'm going to take away and explore. And the last thought was one that I've talked about before, and that's should to could. In anger management, they say that that the word a trigger is should. You look out for should. They should be doing this, they shouldn't be doing that. I should be doing this, or I shouldn't be doing that. Should is a very judgmental word, and it suggests an obligation. That's what Judy said. That was the insight for me. Whereas could is an opportunity, is something we could do. So if you hear yourself saying should, catch that should, and maybe just think, well, if I change that to could, how does that change the sentiment and the sentence for me? What happens differently? How much more useful is that to me? So I hope you found that useful. I hope you found lots of things to take out of that. Judy's written a great book, and very, very happy to share that with you here. Thanks for listening. Please, if you liked it, do all the things you have to do: like, comment, review, follow us on your various platforms, tell other people about it, and may your emotional overdraft always be tiny.